The car's headlights went out, pitch black. She pressed her foot on the gas, felt the gravel jump around the undercarriage. Half a mile in the dark. That wouldn't be a problem. Yira peoples didn't need light. She felt the steering wheel vibrate. She steadied it, then took a sharp right turn, pumping the brakes as she felt the car descend a steep slope. Eventually, she saw the fire in the distance. She parked. She popped the trunk. She grabbed a long cylindrical device with a sharp button, shut the trunk. As she approached, the fire shrunk. Yira gripped the cylindrical device, called a prunt, and pointed it at the flame. She pressed the sharp button until it cut into her thumb. Blood burst. The prunt activated. The fire disappeared. Yira pulled out a tiny bottle and dipped her thumb into the potion. She didn't used to smoke, but 14 months of war had changed her. It was Halloween, 1998. The breeze was cool. She put her hand on the hood. She closed her eyes. She opened them. The headlights were back on. Yira smiled to herself. She got back into the car and drove toward the residence. She flicked her headlights off. The road plunged into dark. She pressed the gas and felt the car shake, the gravel swirling underneath her like a tornado. Yira peoples didn't need light. The true war was a heavy burden for all the spiritualists to bear. They had forged a temporary alliance among themselves. Following the event, Turgo Tapid had agreed to stop attempting to kill the gnomes in exchange for being named commander of the war efforts. Still, Nettie and Yira were coordinating behind her back, and Turgo was growing paranoid that they had gotten to Bishop Garrison and Harriet Johanna. Nettie spent hours each day in his reader chair, desperately trying to restart communications with the gnomes. Over a year of being ignored, but Nettie knew he was making progress. Each night the spiritualists had dinner. They were all cranky and had bad migraines from the VORTEX attacks. They were up all night dealing with the fake gnome fires. Over a year into the true war, they didn't talk to each other. They just sat in the quiet, listening to the sound of Rose Roud's television blaring from upstairs. One night, after dinner, Turgo Tapid approached Harriet Johanna and Bishop Garrison as they washed her dishes. 5 minutes, she snapped. Finish washing my dishes and meet in the projector room. 5 fucking minutes.
My soldiers, you've forsaken me. Your flirtations with our enemy. I have just one plea. Burn the reader chair of Nettie. If you find a no wish, it's squish, it's squish, it's. If you find a no wish, it's squish, it's squish, it's. You must be aware, they seek your despair. False fires and goofy bullshit. We cannot win this war until I ascend the core. So we must find over and squish them, squish them.
The gnomes have joined with the vortex. They spew fire at us, and the fool Nettie seeks friendship with them.
We should squish Nettie too. If you find a no wish, it's squish, it's squish, it's. If you find a no wish, it's squish, it's squish, it's.
Kirk Churpedley was an ugly, stupid man. His son was even uglier. This was how Rose Roud learned of her new neighbors. One day, while out for a morning walk early on in the Ascended era, she saw a terrible, ugly child in the distance, waving to her. Rose Roud would have screamed for help, but the great ignoring persisted. Later that day, she met the father of the ugly child. "Did you throw rocks at my child?" shouted Kirk. Immediately, Turgo Tappet intervened, shooing the invaders away from the ascended Rose, off the property. Over 13 years later, on a fateful April morning, the true war would extend to the Churpedley property line. Kirk Churpedley walked to his pool. Without looking, he plopped into it, floating on his gross floaty thing. He touched his palm to the surface of the water, but something was wrong. It wasn't water in his pool. He called the police. "Those crazy psychics put pink goo in my pool," he shouted. Of course he was wrong. The goo was his own fault. Only a fool would move in so close to the Vortex property, and only an even bigger fool would reject Rose Roud's offer to build a buplin for Kirk Churpedley and his ugly son. This is what Turgo Tappet said to the police when they visited the Vortex property. The authorities left. But the Churpedleys had now gone too far. They had sicked the local sirens on them. Nettie sat in his room. He heard the echo of Turgo Tappet's ranting about the Churpedleys. He saw the police car drive off. He had no idea what was going on, and he didn't care. Without his reader chair, he felt a sense of hopeless he didn't know existed. As his gloom crescendoed, he thought of just leaving, abandoning Yira Peoples and driving away forever. Just then he heard a noise, a terrible screeching, coming from behind his wall. It was a gnome, stuck inside the wall. The noise crystallized. It was mimicry. The gnome wailed, "Boo-hoo, boo-hoo," mocking Nettie's tears. After all Nettie had done for the gnomes, after they ignored his attempts at outreach, after all Nettie had fucking done for the goddamn gnomes. They were actually making fun of him. You see, the gnomes were angry, but gnomes only like to interact with empaths. One of the reasons for this is they thought empaths to be weak. They thought empaths to be ticklish, stupid, and touchy-feely. So now, in this moment, when Nettie was at his weakest, they directed their mockery and rage at him. But the gnomes miscalculated. Because Nettie was not just any empath. He was the strongest empath to ever live. So in that moment, on that night when the war shifted, Nettie did something extraordinary. He punched into the wall, breaking it. He crunched through the wallpaper and debris, feeling the twitching goo of the gnome. Nettie slammed the gnome to the ground before it could cease its mocking cry, and Nettie killed the gnome. He got up. He wrote a quick note and left the residence. When Yira Peoples returned to the room, she saw Nettie's note. It read, "Killed second gnome. Put the goo in the fridge. Off to kill the other 3. Be back soon." Yira Peoples and Turgo Tappet's relationship had never been good, but now it was completely, entirely soured. When Nettie left, Yira began missing Turgo's meetings. She began ignoring her duties. The insubordination began to spread. One day, Bishop Garrison arrived to Turgo's morning meeting 5 minutes late. When Turgo slapped him for this, he had the nerve to whimper loudly. The whimper rang in Turgo's ears throughout the day. As she smoked her final bathtub cigarette of the night, it hit her. There was anger in that whimper. There was rebellion in that whimper. Turgo Tappet had spent the true war putting out fake fires when the real fire blazed in front of her this whole time. She exited the bathtub, walked to Yira's bedroom, slammed on the door. Yira answered the door, saw Turgo Tappet, dripping wet, naked, smoking a cigarette. "You are conspiring against me, your commander in war." Yira Peoples stared Turgo in the eyeballs. "You are not my commander," said Yira. "A commander ascends. You have never ascended. You will never ascend. You are not my commander." Turgo Tappet stepped in. "Tomorrow, when the sky turns pink, you and me will meet at the core of this vortex, and I will incinerate you." And thus, on May 9th, as the sun set, the greatest psychic duel of the Roud era would commence. Both mentees of the ascended Rose Roud, both vying to take her place. Yira Peoples versus Turgo Tappet. The fog was too thick to see through. Kneeling down, Yira felt the wet grass and the frayed edge of the curtain. She was at the core. This would be the first ever psychic duel on the Vortex property. When she stretched her hand out, she couldn't even see her fingertips, but she felt a presence. It was Turgo across the core. As mandated by the rule of psychic duel, she put on her eye cups. Yira searched through the fog for Turgo. She was not looking through space. She was looking through realms. To an outside observer, it may seem like they merely stood there. 16 feet apart, in the fog, their eyes covered, doing absolutely nothing. And on this day, to this outside observer, it may seem like the two spiritualists stood in these spots for 11 straight hours. Just standing there, doing absolutely nothing. This is why you should never trust outside observers. They are fools. Two ships, floating in the sea. They aimed their cannons in the dark and fired. To win a psychic duel, one must sustain. One must make precise calculations and have complete control of their inner mind. During a psychic duel in 1934, Psychic Huntley Johnson was incinerated by medium Beverly Vouve when he let his mind wander for a mere second to the thought of whether he had forgotten to lock his door. Pure, uninterrupted focus was vital. But there had never been a psychic duel on the Vortex property where the energies were dangerously rich. Looking out the kitchen window, Harriet Johanna watched with Bishop Garrison eating a ravioli dish. "Do you worry that they'll die?" asked Harriet. "No," said Bishop, scooping the innards of his ravioli into a separate container. "I hope they both die." Harriet couldn't help but smile. The narrative of a psychic duel belongs to the victor. They report on the duel that took place, how they claimed victory, and their word is taken. The loser, if still alive, accepts or disputes these claims. It does not matter because only the victor's word matters. After 11 hours, the victor recorded the following. "She is lucky to be alive. Within the first attack, I claimed the upper hand. Then I beat her mercilessly. I thrust every spiritual bomb in my arsenal at her. I buried her under rubble, and then I infiltrated. I kept thrusting at her. When she begged me to finish her off, I stopped. And now she sits outside on the ground. She wishes she was incinerated. She wishes she was dead, because Turgo Tappet is something much worse. Humbled. The fire crackled. The silly man on the television made squirrel noises. When Yira Peoples informed Rose Roud that she had defeated Turgo Tappet in psychic duel, there was no response. Yira hadn't spoken a true conversation with Rose Roud in years. "I miss you," she said. "I miss Nettie too. I worry we will never find him. I worry we will remain in this state of infighting and confusion for eternity." Rose Roud blinked. A long blink. She gripped Yira Peoples' hand tight. "The acquired child," she said. "Go to my Rolodex. Bishop's bell. It is set. The Enticer must be called." Strong spiritualists absorb spiritual energies. The psychics, mediums, and empaths on the Vortex property were so skilled that they could suck them up with ease. But spiritualists can also exude these energies. They leak, dribble out like a foaming pus. A rare type of spiritualist exudes these energies like a power hose. They squirt, sprizzle, splash, and dump their energies. These are called enticers. Tucked away in the sacred Rolodex of Roseroud was a folded hermit card. On it was a scribbled phone number. Hundreds of miles away, over the mountains and through the woods, a fancy caller identification device lit up inside of a shiny wooden office. In the adjacent dining room, Trent Hems sat at the head of a long table, hosting one of his many fantastic, fun dinner parties. Hearing the phone ring, he excused himself to the dismay of his guests, who loved spending time with him and wanted to hear more of his amazing, funny story. Trent Hems walked into his shiny office. He saw the caller identification device lighting up with the name Roud. Trent Hems' dinner guests eagerly awaited his return. They could hear him laughing from his shiny office. He eventually returned to the dining room. "Friends," said Trent Hems, his guests unable to contain their giddy smiles as they looked up at his handsome, wonderful face. "I have been summoned. Please finish your dinner and leave." And with that, Trent Hems walked out his door toward his airplane in the distance. Trent Hems was a pilot. He was a businessman. He was a stern, serious man when he wanted to be. He was a bit of a silly goof. And most importantly, Trent Hems was an enticer. He was, as you may have guessed, the most powerful enticer to ever live. When he landed on the Vortex property, the spiritualists approached the airplane with caution. "Hello," said Trent Hems. "I am here to find your empath." He began his work immediately. An enticer had never walked on the property. Enticers percolate energies around them. They exacerbate. They exude. In the early days of Trent Hems' arrival, a sense of newfound order took hold. The infighting ceased. They found temporary structure and refuge in Trent Hems. They spent their days burying Bishop's Bell and walking the property with Trent Hems as he listened in the silence, drawing corresponding marks on a gridded sheet of paper. At night, Trent Hems hosted the spiritualists for dinner parties. They began using the projector room for movie nights and dancing instead of war planning and arguing. Suddenly, the spiritualists were spending time together, laughing, enjoying themselves. Even Turgo seemed to be having a good time. It was very odd. On the 13th day, Trent Hems rolled out a large parchment on the table. It was the Enticer map, completed. He pointed toward the edge of the map. "If your empath is any good," said Trent, "if he knows what he is doing, if he is not dead in a ditch somewhere, then he is here. You will likely find him in a bad state of mind. He will be naked, penetrating the ground. When you walk upon him, you will throw a drenched blanket over him. You will ball him up and take him back to the property, even if he squirms in the drenched blanket. Leave him in the core. I will confer with him." And so the spiritualists followed the map. It was a long, terrible walk. They argued the entire time, and they had to re-drench the heavy blanket thrice.
Damn it, the blanket's dry again!
When they finally reached the spot, they found Nettie, naked, in the bushes, face down in the dirt. Hours later, Trent Hems watched the spiritualists drag the wet, squirming blanket across the property. They dropped him in the core. Trent Hems closed the curtains of the core. Through strained eyes, Nettie squinted. A man hovered above him, ringing a bell in his face. Nettie's head throbbed. He didn't remember much, but he certainly remembered the man ringing a bell in his face. Well, well, little Nettie. Yet again you need to be saved. The water reflected the wispy clouds in the sky in a way that gave Nettie déjà vu. Ready? He snapped out of it. Yira was standing next to him, waiting. He grabbed his fiancée's hand and walked toward the residence. One more gnome remains. I killed the others. This gnome wishes to make a deal with us. A deal? It is a good deal. A deal with the gnomes? I thought you were to slaughter the gnomes. I killed Tom. I killed Sam, said Nettie. And I was about to kill Carl, Turgo scoffed. What a pathetic dork. You gave them fucking names? Shush, shushed Yira. Carl has pointed me toward a massive ground hump on the Churpedley property. I will zench the hump, and the gnomes will allow ascension. The spiritualists exploded in commotion. Nettie was done explaining, though. He left the room and walked to the buke. Trent Hems had been soaking in the buke all day. He was the first person to be allowed in the buke since Rose Rout's semi-retirement. Yira Peoples entered the room, guiding Bishop Garrison to a couch in front of the buke. Please, said Nettie, sit down, Bishop. The relationship of Nettie Hoyt and Bishop Garrison was awkward. Both empaths, Bishop garnered resentment toward the much more powerful Nettie. Nettie sat next to Bishop on the couch. He held his hand. Trent Hems stepped from the buke and robed himself. What is this about? Asked Bishop nervously. Nettie put his hand on Bishop's knee, gripped it tight. Bishop, I saw your brother in the other realm. Isn't that nice? Bishop smiled. Wow, that is nice. I want you to know your brother agrees that you should give me your thumb. What? Asked Bishop Garrison. Nettie went on to explain. Nettie indeed was in need of Bishop Garrison's thumb. It was the main request of Carl, the surviving gnome. You see, Bishop Garrison had killed Todd, and vengeance was demanded. The next 7.5 hours would be referred to as the deliberations for Bishop Garrison's thumb. Bishop Garrison was very upset. He loved his thumb. Nettie assured him, Carl will take good care of your thumb. Serving as mediator, Trent Hems spoke. Are there no other ways to appease the gnome? No, said Nettie. Ah, darn, said Trent. Throughout the deliberations, Nettie gripped Bishop's knee. Yira rubbed his back. Trent Hems squeezed his shoulder. The Hungarian prince burst into the room. What are you doing to him? He screamed. The Hungarian prince begged Bishop Garrison. Do not give them your thumb. You love your thumb. We love your thumb. Oliver the security man escorted the Hungarian prince out of the room. Sacrifice had been a constant for Bishop Garrison. He had sacrificed his brother to the vortex. He had sacrificed his dignity to the vortex. And now he was asked to sacrifice yet another thing he cherished, his thumb. He felt the spiritualists rubbing him, gripping him, pinching his cheeks. They were touching him a lot. The touching had gotten rapid, constant. They played him as if he were some strange, poorly tuned instrument. A numbness overcame Bishop Garrison, and then he felt a vibration in his skull. It rang like a bell. What happens if I say no? Asked Bishop. Nettie let go of Bishop's hand. Blood oozed. He held the detached thumb of Bishop Garrison. If you say no, said Nettie, putting Bishop's bloody thumb into a plastic baggie held by Yira, then I'll come back and take your other fucking thumb for myself. Knock, knock, said the man through the door. Knock, knock! said the man through the door. When he opened his door, Kirk Churpedley was splashed with falling rain. Leading his guest to the dining room table, he stopped to peer out at his swimming pool anxiously. "Is your swimming pool okay?" asked his guest. Grumbled Kirk Churpedley. "Well, anyways, I made a stew." "Oh, good," said his guest. Trent Hems pulled out a bottle of wine. "Do you have glasses?" "Yes," said Kirk, "but I don't like to drink." "Nonsense," said Trent Hems. "This wine is too good to miss, and I can tell you are stressed about your swimming pool." Kirk looked out to his swimming pool, flashing in the lightning, rain dumping down on it. Perhaps a drink would take the edge off. Outside, the rain poured heavy on Nettie Hoyt. He walked to the steepest angle of the hill, at the base, put his hand into the wet grass, pressed. His hand sank into the grass, into the gooey dirt. His arm was inside the hill, his shoulder. He felt the earth absorb him, suck him up. For a brief moment, he couldn't breathe. He almost choked on the rain. The grass, the dirt, the goo. The sound of rain stopped. Nettie was inside the hump. From a distance, Yira Peoples looked through her binoculars. She was waiting for the signal. That was the signal. The television of Rose Roud played a strange show. Yira Peoples walked into the room, gave the ascended Rose a loving kiss on the eyeball, walked to the button, lifted it, turned the knob to the designated number. Beneath the Churpedley house was a hill, but this hill was not, in actuality, a hill. It was a ground hump. And now, in this moment, while Trent Hems distracted Kirk, while the spiritualists descended on the Churpedley property, Nettie Hoyt zenched this hump. Above, Kirk Churpedley laughed heartily. Trent Hems was making a very silly face and doing a funny dance. Trent Hems poured more wine for Kirk. "So, why do you spend your time with those weirdo psychics?" asked Kirk. Skeps are non-believers in the Vortex world. They are very foolish, often ugly people. Skeps are best to be avoided. But Trent Hems was an enticer. He was especially skilled at talking to Skeps. So Trent Hems coolly sat next to Kirk, overflowing his wine glass. "They aren't just weirdos," said Trent. "They're downright crazy. Do you know they believe that your house is actually not sitting on a hill, but rather a bubbling formation of ectoplasmic goo called a ground hump?" Kirk gasped. "Those freaks! How dare they even think such disgusting thoughts of my property?" "I tell you, Kirk, good friend," said Trent. "One of them actually plans to get naked and dig a hole into the base of your hill, and he will burrow inside, performing an act known as zenching. He will zench the hump." This was all too much for Kirk. He saw the storm worsening outside. Flashing in the lightning, he could have sworn he saw someone in his yard. When he alerted Trent Hems of this, Trent Hems laughed. "Dear Kirk, you really are drunk, aren't you? Say, how about we do some shots of alcohol and then chocolate syrup?" Trent Hems then began dumping shots of tequila down Kirk's throat, followed by a spoonful of thick chocolate syrup. It was a delicious, jolly experience, and it provided time. Time for Turgot Tapid to drive the pickup truck into position. Time for her and Harriet Johanna to get the Caradisk off the bed of the truck and dug into the proper position. Half a mile away, Bishop Garrison fell headfirst into the soggy mud. He got back up, grabbed the wire, unspooled it as he forged along in the dark, hard rain. He had much longer to go. He was tired. His hand hurt. At a certain point in his trek, Bishop Garrison wondered how he got here, to this place. but he kept walking. To zench a hump is an incredibly difficult task. A skept may even think it's sexual. To get nude, to involve oneself in the orifices, goos, and vibrations of the realms between. Kirk Churpedley laughed as Trent Hems told him a long, engaging story. It was the best story Kirk Churpedley had ever heard. It had magic, gossip, and hilarious sexual innuendos in it. And even though he was drunk and distracted, he couldn't help but be enthralled. He felt his stomach sink, as if the floor was lowering. The lightning flashed. He saw the horizon rise. Perhaps he had drunk too much tequila and chocolate syrup. A truck drove off his property, mud flinging in its aftermath. Kirk blinked. There! Someone is out there!" said Kirk drunkenly. He wobbled to the ground. "The hill is sinking! The hill is sinking! Oh my gosh!" Trent Hems chuckled as Kirk Churpedley began vomiting all over his kitchen. The hill was not, in actuality, sinking. The hump was being zenched. The ground hump collapsed. Nettie Hoyt emerged, covered in goo. A wave of spiritual energies exploded from the hump, dispersing across the properties. Bishop Garrison finally saw the second Kara disc in the distance. He connected the wire to the Kara disc. He fell to the ground, exhausted. Kirk Churpedley woke up. He was tucked into his bed. Trent Hems entered the room. "Good morning, Sleepy," he said. "Come outside. I have something to show you." Head pounding, Kirk followed the Enticer outside. When his eyes adjusted to the morning sun, he saw it. Pink, gurgling, bubbling ectoplasmic goo covered his property. A fire blazed by his garage. He turned to Trent, tears streaming down his stupid, ugly face. "What happened?" "You got drunk and we had a very fun dinner party." "But look," said Trent, "your swimming pool is completely fine." October 11th, 2000. The grass was dewy. The sky was blue. Yira Peoples sat in the core of the vortex, wrapped in ascension fabric. She had been waiting here all night. She did not know it, but the hump had been zenched. The Battle of Churpedley Hill had been won. When Nettie made his way back to the property, covered in goo, he looked out longingly to the curtain encircling his wife in the distance, at the core. But he could not distract her while she waited to ascend. So he kept walking on toward the other spiritualists, convening in the residence. Tergo Tappet approached Nettie. She handed him a spoonful of gelatin on a fork. Without question, Nettie ate it. Tergo Tappet put the palm of her hand over Nettie's face and gripped it tight. Nettie felt all the residue of the zenching come off him. He felt the soreness lift, his blood rejuvenate warmth and flow. "Thank you, Tergo," said Nettie. Tergo blew smoke in Nettie's face. The Hungarian prince brought out breakfast for everyone. They gathered around the table. Trent Hems poured coffee with potion cream. While they had won the Battle of Churpedley Hill, tension hung in the air. The true war would only end with ascension. The only recorded ascension was May 2nd, 1983. It took Rose Roud 5 hours and 21 minutes. She returned 36 minutes later. "Do you think she'll ascend?" asked Harriet Johanna. The spiritualists argued. Trent Hem spoke up. "Do not forget. The vortex summoned her. Rose Roud is never wrong. The acquired child will ascend." Trent Hems spoke with a reassurance that soothed the room. They all drank the Enticer's delicious coffee. Trent Hems approached Nettie Hoyt. "How are you holding up, old friend?" asked Trent. Nettie looked out at the vortex core. The drapery folded around her, layer by layer of fabric. Then she felt the fabric unspool. The fabric unraveled and unraveled until she pressed against it and broke through. An eternity went by. She was lost in a strange daydream that never ended, staring at the blurry line on the horizon. Throughout this eternity, a figure on the horizon slowly came into focus. Europeoples was no longer Europeoples. She was a piece of goo poking from the wet sand. No, she was an eyeball. Vibrations emitted. The figure began to sway. In a sea of eyeballs, infinite, the entity grew in size, in brightness, in power. Even though she was only an eyeball in this realm, she felt a sinking in her stomach. She felt a tickle in her groin. She felt a pulsating draw toward this strange entity in the distance. A sense of love she had never felt before. In this moment, she knew what she had to do. She had to get the entity's attention. But there were so many eyeballs. She squinted at the entity, for that was all she could do in her new eyeball form. To Europeoples, in her eyeball form, it seemed as though decades passed, with her drifting off staring at the entity's dance, until she came to a realization. Europeoples was no longer Europeoples. She was all the eyeballs. She squinted, not just with one eyeball, but with all of the eyeballs. The entity turned, and it saw her. While she was many eyeballs, she had no mouth, no arms, so she could not shout, "I love you" to the entity. She could not give it a hug. The entity stared at her vast sea of twitching eyeballs, scattered and deformed across the wet sand. Europeoples had to strain in this moment, to keep control of all the eyeballs, to keep from lulling into a demented slumber. It was almost as if the entity wanted her to drift away. But something inside of her cooed throughout the realms. Kill it. No, she couldn't. She loved it. Europeoples had not known what ascension would feel like, what it would be. But now she was here. She had no idea it would be like this. So wonderful. So ticklish on so many eyeballs. The entity's vibrations soothing her in places that did not exist in the other earthly realm. She wanted to scream with laughter, but all she could form were a flood of tears. The entity grew larger, its vibrations tingling intensely. I am all the eyeballs. I am the goo. I am the sand. I am the sky. I am the entity. She ascended once more above. She saw the spiraling core of the vortex. As the entity, she had new abilities of communication, transcendent forms of communication that defy speech, that defy orgasm. As she stared into the core of the vortex, she felt the dizzying sense of weight, the vibrations of another realm. She could have sworn she saw her dead mother, or maybe that was a blimp in the sky, its spotlight enveloping Yura. A message came through that spotlight. It felt like a sweet song reverberating inside of her. She looked down. She saw the vortex below her, swirling, spewing. She felt its energy, its radiance, its power. She did not know in this moment, but these were the negotiations. She did not know in this moment, but she was, in this eternal daydream into the swirling core, seeing the vortex for what it truly was. Seeing death for what it truly was. Back on the property, the fabric unspooled around her. She saw lights on in the residence. She took the back door and snuck upstairs to the room at the end of the hall. The television of Rose Roud blared loudly. Yura people sat next to her. Held her hand. They looked into each other's eyeballs.